Hello everyone, Pablo Munoz here, and welcome to this mini series where I'm going to show you some tips and tricks and some of the new features of the new update of ZBrush 2021.5. So what I have here is just a simple cylinder, and I have a standard UI. The only kind of like custom thing that I have open is this material here, which you can get from the ZBrush Guides website anyway. But if you want to create something quickly like that, you can just select maybe the madcap gray and then just choose a different color, something like that. If you want something more specular than that, you can choose something like the basic material, or even the toy plastic if you want something really kind of like emulating the wet material. So I'm just gonna select that one because I have it already there. And again, this is just a simple cylinder that I'm gonna convert into a polymesh 3D. There we go. All right, so I'm going to start with one of the features that I think is by far my favorite feature of this update, which is the thick skin. So the thick skin, and I'm going to go ahead and open that one up, is going to be here. So let me collapse a few of these palettes. Right, so the thick skin is this one right here, a new sub palette under the tool palette. And basically what this feature does is create kind of like a wrap around the volume of the object, or kind of like a cage, like a virtual cage that allows you to sculpt with it. So what I'm going to do in order to be able to sculpt a little bit better, because right now I don't have enough resolution, is to turn Dynamesh on under the geometry palette, and that is also to avoid any technical limitations, so I can freely sculpt like if this is real clay. So I'm going to click on Dynamesh, and you'll see now I have a bunch more points, right? So you can vary that as well with the resolution here. And I'm also going to turn on symmetry for the time being, so I can hold the shift key and smooth this entire cylinder, just so that I end up with something a bit smoother. Perfect. All right, so now I can turn this off again, the symmetry, and I'm going to show you the effect of this brush, of the standard brush, versus the effect of the same brush with the thick skin. So this is what the standard brush does. Pretty basic, super useful brush, but this is what it does. If I go ahead and enable the thick skin, you'll see that it enables this slider, and this value determines how thick that skin is. So I'm going to use the same brush with the same settings. I haven't changed anything at all, but it's going to give me this effect, right? So what ZBrush is doing is we're using exactly the same values, the same size and intensity as I did before, but we're putting a kind of like a limit to how much volume I can add or subtract based on this slider here. So it does basically what the name suggests. It just adds a thick skin around the volume of the object. So if I go ahead and change this value, pay attention to what happens to the object. It's kind of like an inflate, but it just defaults back to the original volume. So let me just show you what that means. So if I take this, I can change that thickness. Looks like I'm actually inflating the object, but it's really all I'm doing is determining how much thickness I'm going to add. But as soon as I let go of my click here in the slider on the thick skin, right, it just switches back to the original one. But we keep this value here, so 50. So now I can go ahead and do the same thing, and we can push things a lot more, but it's still limiting the effect. So if I look at it from the top, this is the equivalent to 50, so a thickness of 50, whereas this one was about 20. Right, so you can just keep pushing these, maybe 190. In order to see the effect of the thick skin in this case, we probably have to push really hard. But you'll see this is the thickness that we determine, but we're stopping at this very point. So I think I'm going to leave it at something like 25, and I'm going to undo a few of these things actually before. Thick skin 20 or 25, right? So that's determined that thick skin. So it's as simple as that. Like, there's no any other complicated value. This is what the skin does, or the thick skin, sorry. But the real value about this is that when you're blocking your scene, or you're creating your model, you should pay attention to the forms and how the different primary shapes actually communicate the design, right? And when you enable this thick skin, you're not going to alter those very important main shapes or those very important forms, because you're only adding details or the effect of the clay brush to that thick skin, right? So I want to show you how to create your own custom brushes, but I'm also going to show you some of the brushes that I created. So I'm gonna start with number 1. I haven't given it any proper name. This is just what I do when I'm testing. I just number them and they take notes based on the number. So this is what this brush does, right? So it is a brush based purely on the notch brush, I believe. And it's what I try to emulate with this one is kind of like that effect of if you're putting like new pieces of clay on a mesh, or like in a real model of clay, sorry, and you use your thumbs to sort of spread that apart, or like spread that clay around, and maybe a bit oily or with water. This is kind of like the effect that you will get. Right? It's a pretty simple effect, and no matter how hard I press, I'm not destroying the underlying volume or the main shape. So no matter how hard I press and generate these details, if I sort of go back to this angle, you still very clearly see that this is just a very simple cylinder that has some details, and that what this is what this skin, or the thick skin, allows you to generate really, really quickly. All right, so I'm going to show you how to create a couple of brushes just like this, and it's actually really fun and really easy to do. Probably we might need a bit more geometry. So here from the Dynamesh resolution, I'm just going to increase that a tiny bit. Hold Control, click and drag to redynamesh, and every time you redynamesh, ZBrush is creating essentially a new topology or a new arrangement of polygons with new points, really, especially if you change the resolution. So you need to make sure that the thick skin is enabled again. You see, it just got disabled. So now we can go ahead and continue doing that with more resolution, which is great. All right. So the first step to tweak any brush, or at the end of the day, any sculpting brush, as long as you enable thick skin, it will behave in a very similar way. So any brush would do. I just want to show you my favorite ones. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. I'm going to use something, let's see. I think I'm going to use something like the notch brush, because that's the one that I use as a base for the one that I just showed you. So by default, this brush is kind of like a move brush that is going to move the polygons or the points slightly. So if I turn on the polyframe and get closer here, you'll see it's very, like the name suggests, it's just nudging things up a bit. So, and this is still with the thick skin on. So the effect is not, it's kind of like similar to what I just did. You sort of see a little bit of those edges or those borders. So that's the first step, to select a brush that actually gives you an effect similar to what you're looking for, and then you start building on and refining that brush. So one simple thing that we can do is change the alpha. So right now I don't have any alpha enabled. I can add alpha 58, for example. And now those lines are slightly sharper because we're using an alpha that has sharper edges. But in order to see more of that alpha, we need to reduce the focal shift. So the focal shift is that distance between the inner circle and the outer circle of my brush cursor. So if I click on this focal shift, you see that inner circle sort of try to, get smaller or larger. So I'm going to go for something like that, a negative value, and that is just to see more of that alpha, so less fade, and you start to see a lot more of that noise, maybe less than that. I think that's pretty good. And the other thing we can do is just simply add more intensity. So we can add more of the C intensity to deform things a lot more, just move things a lot more. But again, because we have that thick skin enabled, we will be able to add all of these details very quickly. I think I'm going to reduce the focal shift a little bit more. But once you have tweaked the first of those initial settings of the brush, all you have to do is just change the alpha and generate a bunch of different effects. Look at this one. This one is pretty cool. I might save it with another number and take notes. Yeah. So and this is also becomes like a like a tricky thing, because it is really fun to play around with. And I found myself, rather than doing anything or producing any any sort of like figurative object, I just like do this for a while, like for a good 20 minutes, just doing that to understand what this effect was. But just because it was fun, not because I was trying to do anything. But you see, just by changing an alpha, you can generate a completely different effect, right? And this is just the most basic way to tweak these brushes. As soon as you change the or as soon as you turn the thick skin off, the brushes are going to behave very different. So again, this is going to be an example of my custom brush, which is based on that notch brush with some settings. It's very similar anyway. So doing that, right? And if I just go ahead and do the same effect, or trying to achieve the same effect, but this time using the thick skin off, is going to be completely messed up. And that is just because that's, it's not supposed to work without the thick skin. So any brush, any sculpting brush can be used with the thick skin. It's just a matter of knowing which ones would work better with this effect. So I'm going to undo all of that. And I showed you already kind of like the simple way to adjust or create your own custom brushes. Let's go ahead and create a more complex one. So I'm going to select something else as a base, like maybe the elastic one, right? And by default, this is what the elastic one is doing. Again, pretty simple. It's kind of like adding pieces of clay, but at the same time, generating those sort of like hatching effect in a way, or kind of like overlapping pieces, which is pretty cool. So again, we can start with the same rules as we did before. We can change the alpha. I'm gonna give it maybe alpha 48 just to vary things up. Right? Not too bad. Maybe something like alpha 58 should be fine. Something with a flat alpha. Yeah. And I'm pressing the Alt key just to push things in. Right, so it's exactly the same brush. I'm just holding the Alt key to invert the effect, or just pressing the normal without Alt, just to get this effect. And you see it gets, you can kind of like see the circles or this alpha repeated over and over. So there are a few things that we can do. We can tweak the shift, for example, the focal shift, to see less of those circles. Like that, maybe that's too strong. All right, something like this. We still see it, right? And we can just fade that even more. So if we push this one towards positive numbers, we're actually fading that, kind of like a radial fade to the alpha. So we'll see less of that. But another thing we can do is bring in the brush palette, go to the modifiers, and we can take these trails and push that one up. Let's go for 8. So the trails, what this one is going to do, and especially with this elastic brush, is going to repeat this stroke over and over 18 or 8 times. So if I do this, it's going to be a lot smoother, essentially. So you see that I'm sort of like sliding that alpha as I go, and that is because I'm using that trail. So I can reduce that so that the effect is a little bit easier to see. Right? So you can play around with the number of trails. Don't go too crazy with this number, but I think 6 would be fine. I think 6 is the one that I use in one of the custom brushes that I built. But yeah, so now you have this brush that it only took a few seconds to create. And another thing you can do on top of that is to add a bit of this brush modifier to generate some sharper edges. So what this brush modifier does, if you go towards the negative values, is inflate. Kind of like inflate or push the polygons from the center of the brush outwards, or if you do it in the positive values, it's just going to pinch it. So I'm going to exaggerate this quite a bit. So you see right now it's actually it's going to be easy if I just turn off the thick skin to show you the result. So if I do this, you'll see I'm sort of like pinching those polygons towards the center of the brush. Whereas if I go with negative values, I'm also, well, very evidently, I'm just inflating those points, right? Because of all the alphas and the settings of this brush, this is what I'm generating, but essentially I'm pushing polygons outwards. So that's going to be great to generate those sort of like sharper edges, but I want to do that with the thick skin. So I'm going to go for minus 27. That's a bit too much. Minus 18. There we go. So you'll see just by changing that and with the trails, we are able to generate that really nice sort of like edge around those points, and I can start pushing and pulling areas to produce a more convincing effect of sort of claying, layers of clay maybe. And again, I'm not too worried about the strain or how much pressure I'm adding, because at the end of the day, this is just a thick skin determined by this slider right here, and I'm going to maintain the volumes and the primary shapes. In this case, it's just a single or a simple cylinder, but it's going to be maintained. And again, the same thing we did with the previous brush. Once you have all your settings, it's just a matter of taking your alpha, and let's go for alpha 61 again, and producing a completely different effect. So you have another custom brush that could work really well with the skin or the thick skin, and to generate the clay effect, basically, right? It's almost like a water effect. It's really, really cool. Anyway, you can use any alpha that you want. Let's go for alpha 32. So you get a bit more of a texture, for example. And if you cannot see some of the alpha as clear, again, that's because of the trail, because we are overlaying the same effect of the brush 6 times in a way. So we can reduce that to 1, and you will be able to see more of that, more of that texture, or vice versa. You want to see less of that, we can increase the number to 14, and it feels more like a watery effect, which is pretty cool, right? So I think what we had was pretty good. I think 6 works, and again, it depends on what alpha you choose, and you can even import your own alpha as well. So that's another cool thing. But yet, that's basically it. Like, there's not a lot of things that need to be said about this feature other than it is extremely powerful. So just as a quick recap, I'm using a Dynamesh. You can use any object for that matter. I just don't want to be, constrained to the technical aspect of it. So once I finish doing all of these details and I kind of like stretch a few polygons, like for example here, or pinch certain areas, I don't want to have to worry about the topology, so I can just hold control, click and drag, and it will be automatically redynameshed. And if I want to keep adding details, I can enable the thick skin, maybe reduce my brush size, and keep working on it. Now, again, this is part of the recap, as in what I use to generate this effect with the custom brushes. But if you want to add another level of complexity to whatever you're doing, and you will see that in the next video as well, you only need to variate the thickness. So remember, the thickness of this slider would determine how far you can go with the thick skin. So if I just increase that right after I have done all of these details, now I have a new limit. So I can just go even further. Maybe not with this alpha. Let's go with alpha 6. Let's see what that gives us. Yeah, something like that, right? It allows you to go on top of what you did, but this time you're pushing things a bit further. And not only that, you can also use the Alt key to push things back. So this is what allows you to really create a very convincing effect, that you're not only adding material or adding or adding clay in a way, but you also removing it like you would in the real world. So that's what I did with some of the brushes that I built, but it's nothing more than testing and trying this settings that I mentioned. That's all I did with this number 1. It's just that it helps you to sort of build. Let me just turn this on and off just to make sure. Yeah, it just builds these volumes a lot faster. So I'm starting to destroy things a little bit. That's another tip, right? So if you're starting to move things too drastically, again, I'm not too worried, because I can just redynamesh everything, and all the all the topology will be recreated anyway. But if at some point you feel like, oh, maybe this is not working for me, you can increase the brush size. You have your thickness at a certain level, and just go like this, and it's kind of like resetting those details that you did previously. All right, but that's essentially it. We can reduce the thickness a tiny bit again, and then start pushing things in. Oh, maybe not in this case, because we already had a pretty thick skin anyway. So maybe the other way around. There we go. So it depends on what brush you use, but I think it works really well. I'm gonna go ahead and redynamesh all of that, enable thick skin, and start working again. on those details. So in a way, the workflow is pretty similar. It's just a matter of starting with larger shapes, try different brushes, and then start reducing your brush until you get something that you like. I'm going to show you just a couple more of the brushes that I created just to show you how fun this is. Maybe I'm going to smooth this area out a bit. Right? So this one is similar, but at the same time that it, pushes the geometry around, it also generates some nice imperfections or artifacts around. So lots of things that that you can do to make things work really, really fast with this technique. And again, the whole purpose, I believe, in this case, is just to make it look like more handmade, like if it was made in the real world. So hopefully those tips help you to create your own brushes. Again, it's really, really simple. Most of the brushes that are sculpting brushes, and when I say sculpting brushes, I'm referring to any brush that is not necessarily a curve brush or an insert brush or a clip brush, will definitely work with this thick skin. So you can use anything that you want, and just build your own brushes to create this sort of effect. All right, so I'm gonna leave this one here, and in the next video, I'm gonna start with the more practical techniques or the more practical tips on how to use these and how you can apply it to your own models. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.